Two California sisters missing for 36 years have now been found alive and well. Police found both Jasmin and Elizabeth Ramos in Ventura County, California, living under new names. Neither of them had any idea that they'd been reported missing. What? How did this story unfold? Apparently, their mother was killed. She was stabbed multiple times and found dead in Arizona back in 1989.
December 1989. The body of a young woman lies discarded, stabbed, nameless, unclaimed. She is logged into the record book simply as Jane Doe. No family, no identity, no justice. But Jane Doe was not alone. Somewhere out there, her two infant daughters, Elizabeth, just 14 months old, and Jasmin, only 2 months old, vanished with her into the darkness. 2 days later, in a small park in Oxnard, California, the sound of cries breaks through the night. A stranger opens the door of a women's restroom and discovers them, two tiny girls, left on the wet tile floor, abandoned but still alive. No one knew who they were. No one knew where they came from. And no one connected them to the murdered woman in the desert. For 36 years, the sisters lived in the shadows of unknowing, raised under new names, growing up safe but separated from the truth. Their mother's identity erased, their own history stolen. Until one day, a simple strand of DNA unraveled the silence. This is their story. The lost daughters of Marina Ramos. A mother murdered, children abandoned, identities erased, and the decades-long fight to bring them back to the light. You're watching The Found Files. Subscribe now, because every time you do, you give voice to the voiceless. Stories like Marina's only live if we tell them. And without you, the silence wins. Before she became a Jane Doe, before the silence of the desert swallowed her name, Marina Ramos was simply a young woman, a daughter, a sister, and a mother determined to build a better life. It was the late 1980s. America was a place of promise, but also a place of struggle, especially for women like Marina. She carried with her the hopes of an immigrant dream, the resilience to survive, and the most precious responsibility of all, her two baby girls. Elizabeth, her firstborn, was just learning to waddle, her tiny steps unsteady but full of life. Jasmin, still an infant, wrapped in blankets, relying completely on her mother's arms for comfort and safety. Together, the three of them were inseparable, a fragile family bound by love and need. Those who knew Marina said she was gentle but strong, protective of her girls, the kind of mother who gave everything even when she had almost nothing. She worked, she loved, she fought quietly to give her daughters a chance at something better. But beneath that ordinary picture of motherhood was an unspoken tension. Marina's life was complicated, her path uncertain, and the company she kept was not always safe. She was last seen traveling with men whose names were never fully known, one of them called only Fernando. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. For Elizabeth and Jasmin, those final days with their mother would be the last memories they never got to hold. A family poised on the edge of tragedy, and no one yet realized that their story was about to fracture into silence, abandonment, and mystery. December 1989. Somewhere along the lonely stretches of Mojave County, Arizona, the journey ends. A passerby stumbles upon a body in the desert. A woman, stabbed and discarded in the dust, her life cut short with brutal precision. No identification. No family stepping forward. The record books mark her as Jane Doe. What no one knew at that moment was that this woman had been a mother. A mother of two infant daughters. And as the cold desert night fell, those daughters had vanished, gone with the wind, carried away by unknown hands. 2 days later, and 200 miles away, a different scene unfolds. Oxnard, California. A city park. The air is heavy with silence, until a sound breaks through, the thin, desperate cries of children. A stranger, drawn by the echo, pushes open the door of a women's restroom. On the cold, wet tile floor lie two tiny girls. One barely old enough to walk. The other still swaddled in the helplessness of infancy. They are alone, abandoned, left like forgotten possessions in the night. Their mother is nowhere in sight. Authorities rush to the scene. The infants are alive, but their identities are a mystery. No names. No family. No connection to the Jane Doe lying in the Arizona desert. And so, the children are taken into custody, wards of the state. Case files stamped, photographs filed, paperwork signed. 2 little lives, unanchored, floating into a future no one could yet imagine. For Marina Ramos, her story ended in the desert dust. For Elizabeth and Jasmin, their story began again on a bathroom floor. Mother and daughters, torn apart, their fates sealed in silence, each forgotten in different ways. From that night in 1989, Elizabeth and Jasmin's lives began again, but not in the arms of their mother. Placed first in foster care, then adopted together by a family in Ventura County, California, the 2 sisters were given new names, new homes, and new beginnings. On paper, they were safe. In reality, their past had been erased. They grew up surrounded by the familiar rhythms of suburban childhood, schoolyards, bicycles, birthday parties, beach trips. To the outside world, nothing seemed unusual. But beneath the surface, an invisible truth lingered. These were the missing daughters of a murdered woman, living quietly as if their first life had never existed. As the years passed, Elizabeth and Jasmin were told they were adopted. But the deeper reality, that they had been abandoned in a restroom, that their mother had been slain and left nameless in the desert, remained hidden. They carried no photographs of Marina. No family stories. No roots to trace. Childhood memories that should have been filled with a mother's warmth were replaced by unanswered questions, the faint ache of something missing. And yet, they lived. They laughed, they studied, they became women. Never knowing that every milestone, every birthday candle, every school graduation, every quiet night, was haunted by the silence of a past buried in police files and desert sand. Elizabeth and Jasmin's survival was a miracle. But survival came with a cost. Their history was erased, their mother's face unknown, their story left untold. For 36 years, the truth lay dormant, waiting for science, persistence, and fate to crack the silence wide open. For more than 3 decades, the mystery of Jane Doe in the desert and the abandoned sisters in Oxnard lived in separate files, stored in separate cabinets, locked away by time. But time has a way of loosening secrets. In the 2020s, a new tool begins to rewrite history: forensic genealogy. DNA is no longer just a code of biology, but a key, unlocking the forgotten. In 2022, the Mojave County Sheriff's Office resubmits fingerprints from their Jane Doe, and she finally has a name: Marina Ramos. But a name is only the beginning. Who were her daughters? Where did they go? Were they even alive? The case drags forward, and then, in August of 2025, a crack. Investigators working with genetic databases stumble upon something extraordinary: a match. A living woman, her DNA intertwined with the blood of Jane Doe. One of the lost daughters of Marina Ramos has been found. Alive. Hidden in plain sight all along. Investigators make contact. A knock at the door. A phone call that changes everything. The woman, shocked, listens as they tell her she is not who she thought she was. Her past is larger, darker, and more tragic than she ever imagined. And then comes the second wave of truth: she has a sister. Together, their DNA confirms it beyond doubt. They are Elizabeth and Jasmin Ramos. The abandoned girls of Oxnard. The lost daughters of Marina Ramos. 36 years of silence, undone in a single test tube. The threads of a shattered family slowly stitched back together. The forgotten girls finally have names. And the woman in the desert, finally, a daughter's voice to call her mother. The lab results came back like a lightning strike across generations of silence. A genetic match, unmistakable, undeniable, between Elizabeth and Jasmin Ramos and relatives of Marina Ramos. After nearly 3 decades of not knowing, the truth had finally stepped out of the shadows. These young women weren't who they had been told they were. They were Marina's daughters, stolen not just by circumstance but by deception and erasure. Across time and grief, their family, especially their grandmother, Maria, never gave up hope. Year after year, she held on to fading photographs, whispered prayers, and the stubborn belief that her granddaughters were still out there. And now, technology had turned hope into certainty. For Maria and the rest of the Ramos family, this wasn't just a revelation, it was vindication of decades of love that refused to let go. For Elizabeth and Jasmin, the truth was both liberating and devastating. The identities they had known all their lives, the names, the stories, the falsehoods, crumbled in an instant. Every childhood memory now seemed poisoned with lies. Yet, beneath the shock was something greater, the discovery of a family that had been waiting, mourning, and longing for them since the day they vanished. It began not with words, but with tears. In a modest room filled with nervous anticipation, Elizabeth and Jasmin walked through the doorway to meet the family they never knew they had. Their grandmother, Maria, fragile but unbroken by decades of waiting, rose to her feet. Her trembling hands reached out, and for the first time since that desert night, she was able to touch her granddaughters. The silence shattered into sobs, hugs, and the kind of cries that only come from wounds too deep to measure. Cousins they had never met, uncles, aunts, all crowded around, eyes wet with disbelief and gratitude. Every embrace was a reclaiming of lost time. Every smile was a defiance against the cruelty of fate. The Ramos family wasn't just welcoming them back, they were piecing together the broken fragments of a lineage interrupted by violence. For Elizabeth and Jasmin, the embrace of their family was both comforting and overwhelming. They were walking into a history they had been denied, absorbing names, stories, and love that should have been theirs all along. For the Ramos family, it was a miracle wrapped in sorrow, the joy of reunion forever entwined with the memory of Marina, the mother who never lived to see this day. The story of Elizabeth and Jasmin Ramos is more than a solved case. It is a testament to the endurance of truth, how even after decades of silence, the voices of the lost find a way to be heard. Their mother, Marina, never lived to see her daughters grow. Yet through DNA, through science, and through the relentless hope of family, her bloodline has been restored. The daughters she carried into the desert did not vanish forever, they lived, they survived, and now, they are home. Still, shadows remain. Who killed Marina Ramos? Why were her baby girls abandoned in that lonely California park? These questions linger like echoes, reminders that closure in true crime is rarely complete. And yet, what matters is that a family torn apart by violence has been stitched back together by love, courage, and time. Somewhere tonight, there are other families still waiting, still searching, still hoping against hope that their loved one might return. Elizabeth and Jasmin's story proves it can happen, that even after 36 years, the truth can rise. But without voices to tell these stories, without eyes watching, many remain lost in silence. This is where you come in. By subscribing to the Found Files, you're not just watching another video, you are keeping the light on for the missing, the lost, and the forgotten. Every click, every share, every subscription keeps these stories alive. If you don't, they fade back into silence, swallowed by time. But if you stay, if you subscribe, you become part of the reason another family finds hope again. So don't scroll past this moment. Don't let Marina's daughter's story just end here. Hit subscribe. Share this story. Be the voice for the voiceless. Because somewhere, right now, another family is waiting for their miracle.